Show, Season 3, Episode 4. I hope you're going to enjoy today's show, where we're going to be talking sandwich generation and all things car related. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Jason's come all the way from Durban, so it's really nice to have you in the Joburg office.
It's good to be home.
Jason, I mean, we're talking about cars, and the reason we're talking about cars is because it's such a controversial topic, and I think it's very much a South African thing that we do really love our cars. But what we have been picking up in financial planning is it's having quite an impact on people's actual graphs and how long their money is going to last, depending on the price of the vehicles they're going to be buying. So Jason, I mean, maybe just to start, because this is something that I know you do with clients a lot, give me some of your insights.
Yeah, so I think the car conversation comes up very often with clients. I think, as you rightly said, very emotive. We kind of hardwired to want new, shiny things. Cars are status symbols. Often the trend is, I'm at the end of my 5-year service plan, so let me sell the car and buy a new one. And then often the thought process isn't, well, let's see what it would cost to maintain the car and keep it as I want a new car. So it is a very emotional decision. But often when you crunch the numbers and you look at what withdrawing that amount of money out of your portfolio will actually do to your long-term planning and what you potentially are giving up in order to have the car, I like to redirect the conversation there to say, okay, well, let's put in 800,000 Rand for a car, because that's what they cost now. They're expensive. I can't really say investments, they're actually lifestyle expenses.
But I think, I mean, Jason, maybe just to bring it back a little bit, when we do look at cars in South Africa, we need a safe car.
100%
so
right.
Many times when we bring it up in the conversation, we're making sure that they've got a safe car. Yeah. We're also bringing up the state of our roads, so it's sometimes going to be
100%.
more a 4x4 kind of car. So when you come up with these kind of figures, they are more expensive than just a small little runaround car, but we're looking for security. We're looking for
yeah, and it's 100% right. That often you'll find a client that wants to downscale to a smaller car. They have a perfectly good brand, a safe car. It might just be at the end of its service plan, and now they want to downscale to like a small little hatch or something. Sometimes, well, run the cost of replacing a gearbox, run the cost of extending your motor plan or service plan, and let's see what that looks like. Yes, there is the nice to have a new car. It's like it's great to have, but that's a very short-lived experience. I mean, I don't know, for 2 new cars in a very short succession, and they're new for a while and they're fun and exciting, but after a while it just comes a car utility, and then you're so right. Is it safe? Is it reliable? There's so much as South Africans we have to consider when it comes to cars. And sometimes the car you have is the right car to keep. And we often will encourage clients to run those scenarios, just because, by taking an extra 800,000 out of your portfolio to buy that car, you might be foregoing that family holiday with your grandkids, or you might be foregoing something else. So it is quite nice to just see what's the impact of it. Guess what? If you can afford the new car, doesn't impact the graph, and you really, really want it, it's going to add value to your life, then by all means,
well, if not, why not? If that is something that's important to you, and as you're saying that you've got enough money, I think that brings me to my next question, and it's around young people and cars. So, I mean, people are very fortunate when they do have a portfolio that's invested where they could draw out the 800,000, but many of the younger clients don't have that money yet. They're still buying the cars, and they're buying it potentially in quite a few different ways. I mean, maybe just talk us through some of those and the impacts that you've seen that have to the long-term way of getting a financial plan that works for you.
Well, I mean, I think that was the inspiration behind the article that I did write, was driving around, seeing all these young people driving these very expensive vehicles and wondering, well, how do they actually afford them? The majority of them are taking them on hire purchase agreements with extended terms of repayment, so not 5-year repayments, 6, 7 year, 8 years. They'll finance cars over like long periods of time now, and the problem with that is you just pay so much more interest. The numbers I ran, I think on a VW Tiguan with all its extras, okay, it's a very expensive car. It came at about 980,000 Rand.
Sure.
But once you'd paid all the interest, you're paying 1.4 million Rand for the car. And that was at a prime interest rate, and that was over, I think it was a 5 or 6 year repayment period. So you're paying a premium of 400,000 Rand for that car, and that gets forgotten. And then when you trade that car in for your next car, you will probably get 300, 400,000 Rand as a trade-in in present value. So you really are making a big loss on vehicles. And then compare that to taking the car repayment and investing that.
That's just what I was going to go with my next question. But yeah, no, I mean, obviously, because that's the thinking, the instant gratification, I have to have the car now. But what about if we put that money into an investment, got the money saved, and then we went in and we bought the car?
Yeah, and that's, I suppose I was writing an article to myself as well, because it was, the car is the aspirational thing. You want the nice car, you want the safe car and all that stuff. So, I've managed to buy what I think is an affordable car, it has all the features, and I'm happy with it, but there is this element of, well, maybe I should be doing more, getting something nicer, etc. It's a social pressure on us. So I ran this calculation, and yeah, if I invested the same amount as the car repayment for the Tiguan as the example I used, I would have 1.5 million Rand in my investment after the same 6-year repayment term. And it's quite staggering to think that you'd have a car that you could trade in for 300,000 versus the portfolio that's 1.5 million.
And I think that's the reason for us having this discussion today, is just to challenge thinking. Not to just do it because we've seen it done, and that's the way people have done it, is maybe just to have those conversations, have those considerations, because we do get to see way too many people that tell us they can't afford to have an investment, yet when we look, they do have a car that they're paying these big kind of payments for. So we're not saying don't get it. What we are saying is just take the consideration.
You work it into your budget, and you make sure that you are investing ahead of those types of expenses, because that's where you create wealth. If you can afford to do both, then you're in that sweet spot. Then there's no reason not to enjoy life. But I think it's to get the priorities right and say, is my finances in order? Is my future secure? To the point where you feel comfortable, then everything else there becomes, I suppose, surplus, and you could buy that dream car if you really, really want to do it.
And then finally, just to close it, and then you have that option, obviously, if you get those right kind of habits in place, that when you do come up into retirement, that you do have the investments so that you can do those lump sums to pay for the cars. Jason, maybe just with you doing planning for people in retirement and taking out lump sums for cars, how often do you see people replacing their cars, if people are listening and wondering how often is the norm of replacing cars?
We might load a car replacement in our scenarios every 5 years, but that's not happening. I'm finding the clients get to 5 years and they're happy with their car, and they're extending it out and out and out. It's only when something happens, like there's a breakdown on the side of the road and the car becomes unreliable, that there's this big shift in, okay, now I need to do this. But there is a tendency to put it off because they're happy with what they have. That's what I'm finding.
And I think that's the great place to end, because they're happy with what they have. So whatever you might be considering about a car, what we're encouraging you to do is to just think about it and to see how it is impacting your financial plan. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kim.
This segment of the Chartered Show, I'm joined by Tiffany, Havinga, and we're going to be discussing the sandwich generation. And this is something real that we're seeing often in financial planning meetings. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Kim.
What we find in a lot of our planning at Chartered Wealth Solutions is we like to plan for the whole family, and we like to involve all the different generations in the meeting, and we are finding that more and more families are part of the sandwich generation. Tiff, maybe for people that don't know what the sandwich generation is, maybe you could just share a little bit.
Sure. So a lot of people have, and it's probably a sign of the times, but they've got children that they are supporting, still taking through varsity, still educating children, and then parents that have also become dependents on their children. So you've got this sort of generation sandwiched in the middle, where they're supporting a generation above and a generation below them, and it's putting a lot of financial pressure on these families.
So Tiffany, when this is happening, how do you have the conversation with the clients that potentially them helping the younger people and the older people is having a detrimental impact to their plans?
It's a tough conversation, Kim, because it's people that they love and care about. So, on the one hand, you're dealing with parents who may not be able to go and rejoin the workforce, so they don't really have an option, and then children who are still finishing off their studying. I think where the conversation gets particularly tough, Kim, is when the children are finished studying, have maybe struggling to find work. It's tough. We do have a high unemployment rate in the country. But those are the harder conversations to be having about, the children that are capable but not finding work as easily.
And don't you find also it's the parents who potentially, maybe I'm going to talk about myself. Being an empty nest, I can tell you this now. The role has been so important of being the provider and the looking after of your children. So you tend to stay in that kind of relationship with them, and you don't want to let go because it's where you're adding value.
Yeah, and it is so. And like I say, it's the people you love the most. So those are the people that are the hardest to say no to. But what I have found, Kim, is that it's quite important to have boundaries and to say, look, here are the areas where I will support you, where I will give guidance. And as a parent, Kim, you'll know this. Your love for your children is not shown, financially. You can give them career support. You've been in business for years. You know how to help your children be successful in the business arena. You could send your child for coaching if they're struggling with career choices. What we're finding a lot is children who are a bit older, who've gone through tough times like divorce or struggled like that, who then become dependent on the parents after being not dependent on them. So financially independent back to being financially dependent on their parents. There's so many other ways and good ways to support them. So we encourage that because the difficulty that a lot of people are forgetting is that those finances and what you've built up over the years is there for your retirement. So if you spend that on your children, what money is going to look after you in your retirement years?
I suppose then the discussion comes in of you talking to your client and getting them to work longer, because we've got to probably all work together as a family. So it's a family discussion. Maybe then the people that can find work and can work are the ones that are working longer, so that everybody else is taken care of through these difficult, challenging times, which so many people are having.
Yeah, and it's common, Kim. It's not rare anymore. We are finding so many people are living longer. That's why we're supporting parents. And like I said, high unemployment in South Africa, a lot more qualified people coming up through the ranks. So it is harder even for fully qualified people to find jobs that can fully support and sustain them. So we're not sort of, pointing fingers. It is a tough environment to be in. But I think it's really important to, like I say, have those boundaries, have money discussions from quite early on with your children. I think.
And that is it. I know some of the clients, and we always laugh because they blame us. They go back and say, well, Kim says or Tiffany says you can't have this or you can't do that. But it's around involving everybody in the conversations. I want to come now to supporting your parents, because this is something, as you're saying, when you're supporting younger people, and they're going to find work and they're going to be able to get back on their feet. It's a temporary, but when it's maybe your parents, it's a little bit different. My question goes like this: is it not better to have the conversations earlier? What I have noticed with people is they leave their parents as long as they can without supporting them, and then their parents have got nothing left, as opposed to coming in a little bit earlier. I just wanted your view on that.
Definitely, Kim. I think it's much better. Even, we've even got some clients who here and there, have needed a bit of support from their children. And what I'm finding, you have to have those discussions earlier on. So as the children supporting your parents, say to them, look, have an open, honest discussion with me. It's much easier for, even being a child, if I had to support my parents, it would be much easier for me to support them by a small 5,000 Rand a month versus the full 40,000 Rand expense.
So leaving their capital invested for longer and drawing out a smaller monthly amount.
It's easier for me. I can work it into my budget. It's much harder to budget for an extra 40 than it is for an extra 5.
And that's often a lot of pride on the part of the parents going, I don't want my kids to know about it, but actually it's harder then for them. I think that brings me to my final question that I wanted to ask you, and that is, often when you're supporting parents, you have siblings. And what I have seen in a lot of the meetings, it's not, the responsibility is not equally shared between the siblings. How do you facilitate those conversations?
Even tougher than the one you have to have with both. It's tough. Again, a burden shared is a burden halved, and it's not really a burden to support your family, but sometimes just sharing, each person contributes a smaller amount, really goes a long way, as opposed to having it all on one child. But those are tough conversations to have, Kim, because some people are, some of the siblings are better off than others. But even a small amount, and I think this is the key takeaway here, even if one family can provide 1,000 of the 40,000, it helps. It goes a long way.
Or one child can have the parents living with them, one child can do a lot of this helping with the parents. So, but it is bringing those siblings in and having those conversations.
And they're tough conversations, Kim. There's one more thing also, just, what we're seeing now is even parents or families supporting not only children but grandchildren as well. And again, in those aspects, it's really just the earlier the conversations being had, the better. So just another thing to bear in mind. We're calling that the grand sandwich generation.
The grand sandwich.
Even more.
But I think what is beautiful in conclusion is that we do have families who care about us and families who want to and can look after us, but it is a huge responsibility. So we're just encouraging you again to talk to your financial planning specialist about it. Make sure that you're involving all these cases in your scenario planning so that you're planning for it instead of it being an unexpected surprise. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you so much for joining us today on The Chartered Show. Please feel free to like, share, and send your comments. We'd love to hear what other topics you'd like us to cover on The Chartered Show. Thank you.